What a great turnout today. Thank you all for coming. If you all will come down and actually see the play, we can sell some tickets. How many of you have actually seen a professional production of Hamlet? Wow, I bet you are not representative of our community necessarily. But you know, and I want to thank our actors. This is actually their day off. Monday is their day off. They rehearse Tuesdays through Sundays, so I greatly appreciate their time coming down here today and visiting with you about this production of Hamlet. I'll talk a little bit about bringing this play from the page to the stage, and I'll ask each of our actors to share some of their experiences bringing the play to life from their characters' perspectives. And then as we wind that up, we'll also have an opportunity to ask some questions from you guys about things you'd like to know about this production, performing Shakespeare, etc. This is what D.H. Lawrence wrote about Hamlet. I always felt an aversion from Hamlet, a creeping, unclean thing he seems. On stage, his nasty poking and sniffing at his mother, his setting traps for the king, his conceited perversion with Ophelia make him always intolerable. The character is repulsive in its conception based on a self-dislike and a spirit of disintegration. D.H. Lawrence wrote that in 1913. That's not necessarily the plan of attack I've planned for this particular production. But you know, we all have our preconceptions about Hamlet. Even if we haven't seen it, most of us have read it. Earlier today, our board president, Catherine Hughes, sent me a text with the word of the day, a dictionary word of the day. Bricolage was the word of the day, finding a way to use bricolage in a sentence. She sent me this sentence that was a quote in the New York Times. We talk about our familiarity with Hamlet. She says, I point out to my students that no one ever really reads Hamlet for the first time. We've heard it all before in bits and pieces. Cultural bricolage, which means things we collect. Anyway, we all think we know this play. And when we study it and dive into it, we find sometimes we don't. Or like all great timeless works, we learn something new every time we visit this play or revisit this play. This is the fourth time I've worked on the play, the first time as a director. The other times have been either as a producer or as an actor. When you bring the play to life, when you create it on the stage the way it was intended to be created, because keep in mind, Shakespeare wrote for primarily an illiterate audience. He told stories that his audience could relate to, but more than that, he intended the plays to live on the stage. They weren't published and we'll talk about published in a minute, until, after his lifetime. It wasn't like you could just go buy a copy of Hamlet and there it was. So when you start the process, and I started on Hamlet, let's say in March, this particular production of Hamlet, trying to make decisions, taking that sort of that block of granite and chipping away at it to see what it could become, what story we want to tell. As theater people, we tell stories. That's our job. And so when you take what many consider to be one, if not the greatest story in Western literature, how do you want to tell that? How do you not be intimidated by that? There's such an artistic footprint with Hamlet. And yet we want to approach the play, and we talked about this in our first day of rehearsals, we want to approach this play as if we're approaching it for the first time. You do that in three ways, and they're chronological. You begin with the text. Now, not every director approaches Hamlet or other classics from a textural point of view. Oftentimes, directors will come in with a conceit or a concept that they wish to impose on the production. And to greater or lesser extents, they may or may not be successful. I've seen Shakespeare on stage, I don't know, maybe 10 times, 10 different productions. I remember seeing Ingmar Bergman's production of Hamlet in Swedish in 1983 at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, where Hamlet came out and spray painted to be or not to be on the wall of the theater. I assume some poor technician had to paint over that wall before every performance. But you really begin and look first at the text. Now, that's the other thing we bring to the table. There's no necessarily definitive text. There's no historic evidence that can tell us this is the play Shakespeare wrote. There are 3 versions of the play that we turn to as starting points. There are 2 quarto publications and a folio publication. And when we refer to that, when we refer to folio and quarto, all we're talking about is the size of the paper that the work was printed on. A quarto is a folded piece of paper, folded 4 times. A folio has been folded once. It was more expensive to publish in folio version in the 1600s. So perhaps the folios we get a little more weight out of the folios perhaps because somebody took the time and money to publish it in folio form. But for an example, when you're working with the text, now if we were to produce Shakespeare's play uncut, you would be sitting in our theater for 4 hours. If you've seen the Kenneth Branagh film, it's uncut. If you stayed awake through all of it, that's great. But when we come to being storytellers, we have to be practical storytellers too. And we have to understand how a modern audience approaches theater. We are a visual audience now. Shakespeare's audience was an auditory audience. We live in a visual world now. And so, but still, the beginning is the text. But just as an example, in the first quarto publication, the line is, "To be or not to be, there's the point." In the second quarto, the version of Polonius's advice to his son is, "Neither a borrower nor a lender, boy." We know that line as "neither a borrower nor a lender be." And we know to be or not to be, that is the question. And so those variations scholars have debated literally for centuries. And so in this world of scholarly research, you have to make decisions. And in this process, I edited 2 different versions of the play. I edited a version based on my own experience, the story that I thought was interesting to me. And then I sat back and realized, this may be interesting to me because I've been working on the play for 30 years in different ways. But I went back and reviewed the play as if I'm seeing it for the first time, and I changed the story. Hamlet is a play set in the context of political upheaval. Oftentimes when we edit the play, we take out the political upheaval. There's a character in Shakespeare's play called Fortinbras. He is a he is a Norwegian captain, a Norwegian officer, the son of the Norwegian king. That character is frequently cut from the play. He only comes in Act 4 and Act 5. He's frequently cut from the play, and that's usually a signal that we're taking the politics out of Hamlet. And so when I went back and reapproached the play in July, after having edited it once, I decided that it would be more interesting to put the politics back in the play. And so there was an entire section about all of the politics, odd and vague as they may be, and Shakespeare made them up. To put the politics back in the play, I think, gives a context for what happens to these characters on stage. And so that was one of the first edits that I did, was to put the character of Fortinbras back in the play and to tell the story of the context of how this man takes on the responsibilities. And do you know how it ends? See, that's the other thing. Everybody knows how it ends. They all die. Oh, did I just give it away? I'm sorry. As you're working with the text, the second component is the environment, the physical world. How will we bring this text to life visually? I'm often asked if we're doing a traditional Shakespeare. And I don't know what that means. Because what does traditional Shakespeare mean? Does it mean done in the way it would have been done at the Globe Theatre in Shakespeare's day, which would have meant primarily Elizabethan dress with some extras thrown in? A weapon here, a piece of fabric here, maybe something different for the ghost of Hamlet's father. But is that what we mean when we talk traditional? If that's the case, if I was doing a traditional production, then I should do our production in contemporary dress. Because Shakespeare was staging or working with his actors in what was to them contemporary dress. So you throw that idea out the window and you realize, what environment will help me tell the story most effectively? As I look through history and I look through the environment that helps us tell our story, I ended up landing on around 1914 Europe, Why? Because of the politics. Look what was happening in 1914 Europe, a time of impending doom, just about the end of the age of the royal dominance of Europe. Obviously, World War II took out the Habsburg, took out the Ottomans, took out Germany's royal family, took out the Russian royal family. The world changed radically. We started to move into a modern political age after the end of World War I. And so setting the play at the beginning of World War I, or right before the outbreak of World War I, even though historically Denmark had nothing to do with World War I, they were a neutral country in World War I. But you know, again, Shakespeare plays fast and loose with history, just like Shakespeare plays fast and loose with time. I defy anyone to read Hamlet and give me a logistical time frame or tell me how much time elapses over the course of the play. We can't even figure it out because it's completely contradictory throughout the entire play. Figuring out that they'll say things and then they'll say something 3 minutes later that's totally different. And not to digress too much, it's also impossible to tell how old Hamlet is in the play. At one point he's 30, at another point he's 16. And as you can see with Avery, we opted for something in the middle. Anyway, talking about the environment. So we chose to set our play in Denmark, 1914. Now that's not relevant to the set design necessarily. There was an adage in theater, dense text, light set. Light text, dense set. So Mike Nichols, our wonderful set designer, has created an environment that is timeless. Its use of materials suggests ancient, but also suggests modern. And that gets at the timelessness of the story that I wanted to capture. It gives us an environment in which to work. The play Hamlet is set in about 6 or 7 different settings. I don't like set changes. I don't like sets that come and go. So I wanted an environment that didn't have to move. So Mike gave me that environment in a very dynamic way. I hope you'll enjoy the set when you come down and see it. Where you have to get realistic when you talk about a time period is in costumes. You can't make actors wear vague clothes. And even though the costumes also suggest a certain timelessness, we have been very specific in some of our choices. It influences what weapons you use. What are the guards carrying when they come in to the first scene with their weapons? What weapon do Hamlet and Laertes fight with? And so we've tried to be very historically accurate in those kind of decisions, even though the costumes, again, we're not looking to create a museum piece with our production. We're not looking, that's not the point. The point is the storytelling through the words. There's an adage in Shakespeare that there's no subtext in Shakespeare. It all lives on the words. And so that environment is the second issue we wrestle with when we're trying to bring the story from page to stage. The third is the actors. And the actors, come into the process last. Text first, then the environment. And this is just, first of all, this is me creating a play in my head and creating a world in my head. And then we bring in these guys to muck it all up. Because the actors are the last part of the process. We go to New York, we had 5,000 actors apply to be in our production of Hamlet. We winnowed that down. We auditioned about 250 actors in New York. We auditioned wonderful actors here in Central Arkansas. And we have a cast of 14 to help us bring this play to life. And I could not be more pleased with the actors we've assembled. We have just finished our first week of rehearsal. The rehearsal period is 22 days, from the first read-through to opening night. And we've just finished our first week. I've worked with the cast to stage the first 3 acts of the play. All Shakespeare's plays are 5 acts. We will stage Act 4 and Act 5 in the next few days. I haven't yet determined where the intermission is in the play, which is very important to our front of house because that's when you can come out and buy some liquor for the second half of the play. We're still working on those kind of issues. But I want to turn it now to our actors, and I want to ask them to discuss their approach to bringing Shakespeare's play to life. And Colin says, no, let me go the other way. I'll save the best for last, Colin. Or I'll do it by age. No. Avery, let me start with you. Now, Avery is our Hamlet. And Avery has played Hamlet before, fairly recently at the Orlando Shakespeare Festival in Florida. And so, Avery, talk a little bit about what it's like to create this role that, as I was reading this quote from the New York Times, we all think we've seen before, even if we haven't. Because it's such such a penetrating part of our culture. How do you approach a role like that? How do you approach Hamlet?
Okay. Oh, I hate microphones. How do you approach? I'm going to disappoint no matter what I say. Hamlet is much more well-spoken than I am. How do you approach a role? I think, as an actor and the grandiose nature of just the name Hamlet, it can really kind of scare you, but I do my best to approach the role as I would any other role, just by reading the text and in the building of a character process, reading what Hamlet says about himself and what the other characters say about Hamlet, and just trying to find how it resonates with me and how I resonate through it and what I become emotionally connected to with the character. And the hardest part of the character of Hamlet is he's so inconsistent. He bounces around thoughts constantly, and he's really all over the place from scene to scene, and the emotional and intellectual leaps are really difficult to figure out what he's doing. And eventually, the last time I did the show, it was very close to the end of the rehearsal process, and I learned to embrace that because we as humans are inconsistent. And if anything, Hamlet is the embodiment of the inconsistency of human nature. And for an actor, that becomes really, really fun just to make the audience keep up with me, as opposed to letting you be one step ahead of me, I'm one step ahead of you. And you're allowed to get away with so much in that, because is the character mad? Is he feigning madness back and forth and whatnot? But brevity is soul wit. I'm gonna stop talking in a second. But ultimately, I was really struck by Hamlet's sincerity and his honesty and his love for everyone, and I think that's why he lasted. Yes, he's angry. He's a very angry young man for good reasons, but I think a lot of it springs from loss and someone who's really hurting, and I think that's something we can all relate to, and that's something I really feel sorry for the character, because he is a great guy in a hopeless and terrible situation.
But you know, we've made the point in rehearsal, there's the cliche of the melancholy Dane.
Yes.
And we've banished that phrase from rehearsal because we don't believe that's how Hamlet should be approached. The word we're talking about is Hamlet is always searching for the next thing to get done, as opposed to letting circumstance just wash over him.
Yeah, it's a revenge tragedy. I mean, when it was written, I'm assuming that's what it would have been considered as a revenge tragedy. So
right,
there is
that's the category.
Some form of excitement to that. And to be melancholy the entire play is really boring for me and for the audience as well. And he has those moments, but that's just a shade of his character. And to not touch upon all of those little points of the human emotional experience is really a disservice to the audience and myself.
Good. Let me turn to Nikki and ask. Nikki plays Ophelia for us, and one thing for both Barbara and Nikki, we talked about this, you know, backstage a little bit, that here you are playing, both of you playing very iconic roles in Hamlet, but also keeping in mind that all of Shakespeare's plays, there's usually 20 or 30 men and 3 women. So women's roles in Shakespeare are precious. And of course, Shakespeare was writing for men. Ophelia and Gertrude would have been played by young men on Shakespeare's stage. So again, if you want a traditional production of Shakespeare, anyway, we're glad you're not men. Nikki, how do you approach Ophelia in that context?
I think it speaks to what you said before about which came first, the chicken or the egg. Did I see the movie first when I was younger? Did I know the play? Had I heard pieces like Did I Know Himself Be True? All the little gems that when you come up and you see the play or you read it, you go, I didn't know, is that where that came from? There were so many things that Shakespeare coined, phrases and ideas that we use every day, and it's not until you see the play and hear it and go, oh, that's where it all started. So there's that moment, having seen the various movies, everybody's various versions of what it is, having seen different productions myself. I'm a terrible audience member. If there's a part in it that I think I would play, I'm like, oh, I wouldn't do it like that. Oh, no. No, this is what it's about. No, I wouldn't do it like that. And then you finally have this moment where you get to play it. And you say, I get to be Ophelia, this is so exciting. I'm going to play Ophelia. Oh my God. And there's that flip side of all of the ideas that you've had have kind of been in a vacuum because it hasn't been with this set of people, with this director, for this audience, with this set, these costumes. So I think the biggest challenge at the outset was to not have a preconceived notion of what it ought to be based on what I thought it was. But now that I'm of this age, with this experience, and with this cast, to find the play is a really exciting thing. But in terms of process, you have a familiarity with the play, a relationship that you know it. You know the play, you know what happens, you know who dies, you know I don't make it, it's fine. But there's these great books called the lexicons that I go to first. They're sort of encyclopedias or dictionaries of meaning. So, for instance, the word nunnery, in the nunnery scene. Nunnery has several contexts. And so, it could be a nunnery, exactly what it is, or it could be a house of ill repute. And what does he mean to tell me, and what do I hear? You know? So there's each word through the play, I go through and look up what I'm actually saying. And do I actually know the shades of meaning, the connotation versus denotation of what I'm actually saying? And then you try to get it in your body, and because there's wonderful rhythms and poetry, obviously, that you're saying, and it's different than just learning the order of lines. It's truly about learning the meanings that are being passed back and forth, and the action, what is happening, what is being conveyed between the two characters. So we do that, and hopefully we've done all that work before we come to see you, and we understand who we are and where we are, and what each character means to us, and then we play.
Because it is called a play.
Indeed. So, I mean, I think the exciting part of just even being an actor is being wrong courageously. Because you need to feel comfortable making mistakes, to say, oh, I have this fantastic idea with nope, we're not going to do that? Okay, that's fine. You know, but you have to know what the wrong answers are, to know what the right ones are, and to find the play that we're going to give you.
You know, there is also a cliche for directors that you can direct an entire play with one sentence. Let's try it. And if you think about it, yeah, it would be a really long rehearsal process, but you could do it. Barbara, let's turn our attention to you. Barbara is our Gertrude. You have played the role before. And tell us about how you approach. You know, there's another cliche about Hamlet. You know, they always talk about, oh, Hamlet's in love with his mother. You know, every new idea is pasted on to Hamlet. So when Freud evolved his ideas, suddenly Hamlet became in love with his mother, and that's where a lot of the action of the play comes from. We are not taking that approach. But yet we are also exploring the vitality of Gertrude and the role the role she plays, the pivotal role, because everything kind of emanates from Gertrude. Hamlet, obviously, is her son. She marries her husband's brother, whom her husband's brother has murdered. And you have to ask all kinds of questions. Did she know it? Were they together before? I mean, Hamlet Sr. was a big warrior. He probably wasn't around very much. What went on? These are the kind of questions we talk about in rehearsal, and they're fascinating for us. And in that context, Barbara, talk about creating Gertrude.
Well, actually, I've been miscast. I didn't want to grow up and be Gertrude. I wanted to grow up and be Hamlet. So, you know, I started with a problem. But I began studying Shakespeare seriously when I was a teenager, because I gave up a career in pre-med to go over to England and start studying it. So from then, I had this huge, passionate love affair with this man, William Shakespeare. If he were around, I would have been there, anything he needed. But then you come and you bring it to your professional life. Playing Gertrude, the first thing I always have to do is bring it to a modern sensibility. While my passion is Shakespeare, I live with a man who is also a professional actor who doesn't read Shakespeare at all. It would be easier for him to read Korean. Somebody's smiling at me. I think a few of you may know him. His name is Brad Little. He played the Phantom in the Phantom of the Opera for about 2,000 and sometimes and came through here. But when I'm running around the apartment saying all these words, Brad will look at me and go, What are you saying? What do you mean? And until I can look at him without literally breaking it down and say what I have just said, and he gets it, then I know I haven't finished my homework. Because it's the language. I love the way the language sounds. I mean, I can just listen to it, and it sounds beautiful to me. But if that's not your thing, then we need to be able to say it in such a way without changing a word of it, that it becomes completely clear to you. That's always the first challenge for me. For Gertrude in particular, the first time I played it, I was literally too young to do it. It was a long time ago. So this is a whole new ball game for me. The first time I played it, the director told me, I said, and it was the second time the role had been offered to me, so I thought, man, I must be putting something out there to do this play. And he said, well, think of it this way. Think of her as Juliet going on. And I had played Juliet. She gets married right away. She has a kid right away. And he's young. He's gone off to school. I said, okay, so Hamlet's like, 19, 20? No, Hamlet's probably older than you are, but don't worry about it. So I was like, okay, here we go. Anyway, I'm taking a whole different approach to Gertrude this time, a much more mature approach, if you will. I don't think that he has a kind of Oedipal complex. We haven't really talked about it, but I can't find that in the text. I could see it in the Mel Gibson, Glenn Close movie, but I don't see it in the text. Do you?
No.
I don't either. So I think there is a huge mother-son love. That relationship is paramount. It's really strong. But in the time since he has gone off to school, we don't know what Gertrude's been doing, but it has to have been something because she marries this man a month after her first husband dies. Now that's saying a lot about what was going on between the two of them, I think. Her primary focus, ultimately, at the end of the play, becomes split. Who's she going to protect? She wants to protect him, to keep him safe, to not have anything happen to him. Yet at the same time, when Laertes comes in to threaten this one, just after she's found out that he killed her first husband, she protects him. She says, back off, Laertes. He's not the guy. He didn't kill him. Well, if he didn't kill him, she's automatically setting it up that he did. So she is torn, very torn. I have to resolve all these things.
That's all right.
I'm working on it.
You got 10 days. But Barbara brings up an interesting point. We've set our play, for reasons I talked about earlier, right before the outbreak of World War I. Now, as we solve problems in rehearsal, here's what we're wrestling with. We talk about an issue, what was Shakespeare getting at in this particular, what choice should we make in this particular moment of the play? And so we have three things to think about in terms of making that decision, in terms of where it's set. What's the right etiquette, for instance? 1914, when we've set our play. 1600, when Shakespeare wrote the play. Or 1050, when the myth, the Hamlet myth, on which Hamlet is based, is set. So we have lots of conversations, and the default is, well, okay, we're setting this play in 1914, so there's sort of a, is there that? We even talked about it in terms of how Gertrude and Claudius enter. What kind of physical contact do they have? Should it be an Edwardian approach? should it be an Elizabethan approach? Should it be a medieval approach? So by setting the play where we've added layers of complexity to our rehearsal process in deciding what is true and what is consistent. Because that's something we have to hang our hats on, is consistency in terms of our decision-making process. Now let me turn to Colin here, who is our actor from Great Britain. Colin was in, of these actors on our stage, Colin is the only one that rep audiences will be familiar with. He played Dr. Watson in our production of Sherlock Holmes a couple of years ago. And so we are delighted to have Colin back. And Colin, you know, when you have 14 actors, there's more than 14 characters in the play. So Colin is the only one up on stage here who plays more than one character, who doubles. Claudius is also playing the ghost of Hamlet's father. That is an unusual choice. It's been done once before that I'm familiar with, but usually in the traditional doubling arena of Shakespeare, of Hamlet, the actor who plays Hamlet's ghost also plays the player king, the leader of the traveling band of players that come in to entertain, and he also plays the gravedigger, which is the low comedy character in Act 4. But we chose a little something different, and we did it very specifically. It wasn't because we didn't have anybody else. Really, Colin, it wasn't because we didn't have anybody else. So I want you to talk about creating two characters, and also the fact that, you know, the weight of playing the ghost, which of course tradition tells us is the role that Shakespeare played in the original production of Hamlet.
Thanks, Bob. Well, it's wonderful to be part of such an intelligent, sensitive, accomplished American cast.
What's your point there?
Before I get to that, it's interesting to play two characters who are brothers. One of my favorite quotations in all of Shakespeare comes from a conversation between two other brothers in All's Well That Ends Well. The web of our life is of a mingled yarn, good and ill together. So our virtues would be proud were they not whipped by our vices, and our vices would despair were they not cherished by our virtues. And I love that quotation because it talks about the range and the inconsistency of human nature. When you start working on a part, you look at the text and you go, well, what's the information here? So for example, you must not think that we are made of stuff so flat and dull that we can let our beard be shook with danger and think it pastime, says Claudius, one of my characters. So okay, he probably has a beard, right? Good. Hamlet refers to him as the bloat king. Well, as a middle-aged character actor carrying 1 or 2 extra pounds, I can relate to that. And I also know how to drink. Okay. But one of my characters murdered the other one. Well, I've never murdered anyone. It's true, I never have. So how would you go about imagining what that's like? One of the features of Claudius, the king, the usurper, is that a lot of his stage time is in public space. He's fulfilling some official function, or he's talking formally. And there's one scene which is private time, when he really reveals his inner thoughts and what he's struggling with. So I mean, I'm excited to hear this conversation that we've had, and you know, I'd agree with everything that's been said, and say that the challenge of any production is to bring it to life. And my acting teacher in London used to say, on the very first night of Hamlet in 1600 or 1601, whenever it was, the questions were the same as they are today. Will the story work? Will the fights work? Will the love interest work? And will the old fool who's playing the king remember his lines? But of course, what really makes a play work, any play, any time, Shakespeare or otherwise, is the creativity of the production. And there's something that can only happen in the moment. So if the actors are present and the work has been done and people go on stage prepared to be in the present, living through those experiences, then the story comes alive in a way that it never does if our phrase is just phoning it in. Are you familiar with that phrase, phoning it in? In the age of smartphones, it's very tempting to want to do that sometimes.
So how, you've obviously acted in England.
Yeah.
How does the approach to Hamlet or the approach to acting Shakespeare differ in England from your experiences here in the United States?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm glad you told me you were going to ask me that 5 minutes before we came
No
on.
surprises, no surprises.
Because I've been thinking about it, and I think obviously there's a different we have a different context in England because Shakespeare was English as far as we know. And what's amazing about this writer is that 400 years later, the Shakespearean industry is alive and well. And if you go and visit Warwickshire and go to Stratford-on-Avon, you'll see a theatre dedicated to his works. There's a large national company, the Royal Shakespeare Company, which is dedicated to producing the plays of Shakespeare. And every regional theatre in Britain, of which there are 110, usually produces at least one Shakespeare play in every season, at least one. As well as which every graduating actor from every drama school in the country wants to get their hands on Shakespeare as soon as they possibly can. Why? You have to ask yourself why. Why is this playwright so enduringly popular? My view is that in a world where there's no shortage of product in every medium, books, films, TV, whatever you like, there is a shortage of meaning. What you were talking about. Meaning is exciting. To understand something in a way you didn't understand it before, to see something new, to have some new insight is exciting. It's what makes life worth living. So with that background, you have to say that there is a Shakespearean tradition in England, and there's a level of immersion, you know, which makes us familiar with a lot of the material. But having said that, we have to understand that the 20th century saw this enormous diaspora of Shakespeare. Tyrone Guthrie came to America and he stuck a pin in a map and said, where do they need a theatre where they can do some Shakespeare? I know, Minneapolis. And then when he went there and built that theatre, he moved to Stratford, Ontario. And then he went to Sydney, Australia, and he said to the Australians, you're not ready for a Shakespearean theatre. So there is a difference, but consider that I've just been in San Diego and my girlfriend was in a play there at the Old Globe. That was one of the first Shakespeare festivals in the USA. At the time it was founded, there were 3 Shakespearean festivals in the USA. Now there are 153, including, for example, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival with its operating budget of 30 million. So Shakespeare as a brand is very successful in America. So, I mean, yeah, there is a difference, but there's a lot more that's similar than there is that's different, you know.
The popularity of Shakespeare remains unabated. Of the most produced plays, of the top 7, 6 are plays by Shakespeare. So there's something to that. There is something to that industry. There is still a desire to hear those stories. And now let's take this opportunity to open up for questions. What would you all like to ask these actors, or about our approach to the play, or anything else you would like to know? The importance of being earnest. Thanks, Ruth. I'm glad I knew. I could have just made something up. She just asked her question right here. Back there.
What freedom does the use of a ghost give Shakespeare and the cast and the director? Is that just a conceit, or does that give some freedom that perhaps a live character does not?
Well, I'll start and then you can pick up on it. She asked, what freedoms does a character like a ghost give you in the creation of the play? And one of the things we talked about as actors, because just as you have familiarity with the play, these actors have familiarity with the play, and we had to be very mindful that we didn't make assumptions because we know what the outcome is. In other words, at the beginning of the play, you know, Hamlet doesn't know he's going to die, nor does he want to die. I mean, he contemplates death a little later on, some speech he makes later on. But you know, Hamlet's, nobody's setting out, nobody knows where, everybody's expecting things to go really well. Claudius and Gertrude, they're looking at a happy life here, running a kingdom. The ghost, we don't want to make assumptions. The ghost comes on and says, I was killed by my brother. And so we take that at face value. But in Shakespeare's day, and as we've worked on it, that ghost could have been a demon. He could be lying. We don't know that he's telling the truth. And Hamlet says, I don't know if it's not until about 45 minutes to an hour later in the text that Hamlet says, "Now I believe you." And so the ghost gives us the opportunity, I've often heard Hamlet described as a ghost story. It gives us the opportunity to lift the play out of the realm of realism, even though Shakespeare, directing Shakespeare is more like directing a musical than it is like directing Arthur Miller. Why? Because Arthur Miller and plays like our modern realists create a fourth wall between the actors and the audience, and they deal with psychological realism full of subtext. Shakespeare is presentational like a musical. It's the actors in the musical come out and sing right to you. This actor comes out and talks right to you. There's no fourth wall. It's a different approach to theater, much more akin to music. That has nothing to do with your question. But I thought I would digress. And now I'm going to let Colin, who's much more eloquent about it, talk about how much freedom you have playing the ghost.
Well, back to the richness of this story, it works on a political, psychological, romantic, revenge. It's got all these elements, and it also has the supernatural in it. I don't know how many people here have ever seen a ghost?
Nobody's going to raise their hand in public.
Well, I have. And if you come and see our play, we'll try and let you see one then. I mean, it's a challenge to stage a ghost. How can you make people believe that there's a ghostly figure on stage? You'll tell us if we succeed.
And that's something we've worked on quite a bit, is how do you tell a story about a ghost? How do you bring a ghost on stage? And we actually have a particular take on that I think is fairly new in terms of how we're approaching the use of the ghost. Behind you is a question.
Hi, I'm Hillary. I go to the Clinton School. Thank you so much for being here. 2 quick questions. The first one, what is the 7th most popular play? You said 6 of...
That was Ruth's question. The importance of being earnest.
Okay, I'm sorry. We were guessing back here. The second one has to do with the double casting again. As the ghost is supposed to represent the dead king, was the choice to double cast Claudius as the ghost... Do you want to portray some sort of foreshadowing there, or was it just a way to kind of minimize actors? Are you concerned about that happening? Just curious, because he's supposed to represent his dead brother, correct? The slain.
Right. There is the familiar link that he's playing his deceased older brother. There are, we need to give Hamlet, the character, all of the ammunition we can. Make his obstacle as complex as possible. In acting, it's all about making choices and encountering and attempting to overcome obstacles. That's the entire formula for acting. And so we want to find as many obstacles as we can, because why doesn't the guy just take his knife and stab the guy? I mean, we could get home a lot sooner, and it's going to happen sooner or later. Let's just get it over with. So we want to put as many obstacles in Hamlet's way as possible. One of those obstacles is we talked about complexity and ambiguity, because this is a messy play. And creating or letting the same actor play Claudius and his father, Hamlet's father, adds a level of ambiguity and a level of perhaps doubt and complexity to Hamlet's character, or to Claudius's character, that isn't there otherwise. And I also think it gets to the issue of truth. Who's speaking truth? We think Claudius is a villain because we know he killed his brother. But to the average Dane in the court at the time, this guy's great. He's a great politician. He is a wonderful diplomat. He is a successful diplomat. He's in love with this other woman. I mean, in order for this play to succeed, we got to like this guy. If we think he's a villain from day one, we just write off the play. But another reason Hamlet doesn't kill him. He's popular. He's not King John. He's popular. Okay, there and over here.
I was just wondering if you could talk about Hamlet as loving. How does that play out in the relationship between Hamlet and Ophelia?
You may want to repeat the question.
Okay, he said, I mentioned Hamlet and loving people, and he said, how does that play out between Ophelia and you? And I think that it also could stem to Gertrude as well, because, and I think over time, this wash of this great love story between Hamlet and Ophelia is in the script, which it's not. We have one scene together, really, and I kind of berate her a little bit before the play within a play. but we really only have this one scene to set this this relationship up. But what was the question? Oh, the loving. Again, it deals with loss. Throughout the course of the play, you hear through her. I've been giving her love letters, and her father tells me to stop talking, for her to cut off all communication between us. And at the start of the nunnery scene, get they to a nunnery, she returns all my love letters to her, and then I point blank ask her a question. Where's your father? Because I have an idea he's in the room eavesdropping, and she says,
At home, my lord and I.
so she's a liar. And so that's where a lot of that comes from. But we are looking for, with Bob, we still haven't completely detailed it yet, but it's definitely something all three of us want to do, is the beginning of that scene, make it more of a loving scene when she's returning the information to me. And then, of course, Hamlet has to snap, because it's there. I'm talking. And I'm going to turn it over to her, because I got done.
Thank you for your permission to speak. No, there's something in it which we were kind of talking about with Bob, is that this isn't a new sort of fling. That Ophelia, we kind of think is probably about 23. Imagine, if you will. But she's coming into a level of seriousness in relationships that hasn't probably been available to her. So I'm out of my depth. I don't know what to do when he's freaking out, and I don't know how to help, and I want to fix it. And out of that, I defer to my father, to Polonius, and they say, this is what we're going to do. Don't you worry, we've got it figured out. And I go along with this, and in trying to fix him, I essentially betray his trust. And so that's kind of heartbreaking, because I didn't mean to, but I'm one of the only things that he could still believe in, and I let him down. And so out of that, we talked about the flip of, because I love you so much, you've disappointed me so much, and that is why I can't hold back how as my fist is telling me what starts to happen, It's that the depth of the passion is then the reverse in the rage in terms of what I've done to him.
And just to further ramble, but from the love, instead of it just being someone who's angry at someone, it's because of that love that I have for her and for my mother and for everyone in the play. Throughout the course of the play, I start losing my friends and losing my family, losing my loved ones. It begins with, I've just lost my father. My anger and my hurt comes out of that loss of love, or it not reciprocated the way I would like it to. I'm not saying it's the wrong way. 'Cause my mother, from the first scene we had together, she's very loving towards me, but it's not the way I want it to be. So it's somewhat selfish as well. But I feel it has to come out of something positive and sincere, as opposed to just a very negative person, or that's just kind of a petty person. So yeah.
And then you kill her dad, which is always bad for relationships.
Yes.
There's this point at which his love for these people is holding him back from the revenge tragedy component, and then there's a break of a sword.
Mm-hmm. Well, eventually, and it's in his final soliloquy to the audience, where he says, my thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth. From that point on, he does not talk to the audience anymore, and he goes and he has premeditated murder on Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, which all happens off stage. But from that point, he's not acting in crimes of passion. It's premeditated. From this point forward, I will less talk, more rock.
We can take one more question. Yes, sir.
Well, you've already talked about this a little, but I've seen a few Shakespeare productions over the last couple of decades, and just about all of them seem to be brought into more or less modern times. And I wonder, first, is that also the case typically in England with Shakespeare productions? But also, seeing as how Hollywood is so in love with period pieces like Robin Hood or King Arthur, and it seems quite successful there, and you never see King Arthur in World War I or II times. What really drives the stage productions to make them more modern?
On the stage, we are freed by our limitations. Hollywood has budgets that would run the resident theater company in the United States for decades. And so when we make choices, we have to make choices in the context of our canvas. And our canvas is that stage for those 2 hours. And so we look, in that context of being freed by our limitations, we look to create a world that helps tell the story in very economic ways. And I mean economics literally and figuratively. And so oftentimes directors will say, oh, it's been done that way a million times. I don't want to do it that way. Somebody else has done it that way. That's somebody else's show. I need to do my own production. And to some extent that's true for all of us who are directors. Good directors will steal the good stuff from the previous productions and make it their own. But really what it comes down to is, and I don't know how other directors make those decisions, and I know that costume dramas are big box office money. But I also know that in the context that I've just discussed, we want to look to tell our story as efficiently and wonderfully as we can. And it's not, I don't look to make it modern just for the sake of making it modern. In the Shakespeares we've done at the Rep, the historic time period has been all over the map. This one gravitated towards itself of its own volition as I was working on it. And I'm quite fond of the costume era, but be that as it may. And then Colin, how about in England?
Sure. No, I think that any possible period setting is viable. One of the most amazing productions I ever saw was one of Shakespeare's lesser-known plays, Cymbeline, which is sort of, 2,000 years ago, played with 5 actors playing about 30 characters. They were dressed all in white. There was no set, no costumes, no lights, no makeup, no props, just the story. And it took a little while to get into, but it was wonderful because your imagination was so engaged. And at the other end of the scale, last year I made an Arkansas connection last time I was here. An actor called Joe Graves and I became friendly, and at Joe's invitation I went to Beijing last year, and he and I directed a group of Chinese undergraduates in Julius Caesar, all female. So there we had 22 Chinese undergrads doing Shakespeare in English, and it works. It works.
I got the mic again. I saw at the National when I was in London in 2002-ish. I saw Winter's Tale and what's the Bohemians and what are the two factions? The Sicilians. The Sicilians were Texans and the Bohemians were Arkansans. That is the production in London. That's what it said in the director's notes. So they're doing it too, and they're calling us Bohemians. I'm an Arkansan. So
did they play football?
No, they should have.
Oh, see?
We had a Texan in Comedy of Errors production in London, based on the simple line, "I'm sorry now, I did draw on him."
Yeah, see, there's this whole bad movement about making the Southerners the butt of all the jokes in Shakespeare. We're not doing that in our production. Hey, I want to thank you guys for being here today, and I want to thank our panel of actors for being part of this conversation today. Thank you all very much.